and good evening, officers. I think 7:15, so we'll start the meeting. So, yes, welcome everybody. Good to see you all here, and welcome to officers, and welcome to any members of the public who are viewing on our YouTube channel or on the webcast. So, apologies for absence. We have a number of apologies this evening. We have apologies from Councillor Scattergood, who's being substituted by Councillor Hensman. Apologies from Councillor Bowers, who's been substituted by Councillor Wilson. Apologies from Councillor Unsworth, who's been substituted by Councillor Thorogood. And we also have a late apology from Councillor Ritchie, who has not got a substitute, but otherwise we are here. Item 2, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare any the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest relating to items on the agenda? Councillor Schreer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to declare an MPI in agenda item 5A, as I am the ward member to Land South of the Limes, Gosfield. I have been in parish council meetings but have not taken part in any conversation, and also I am an Essex County Council member as well. Thank you. So I shall stay and vote.
Thank you, Councillor Schreer. There are no other declarations, so I'll move on now to item 3 on the agenda, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. Members, you've had circulated the minutes of the meeting of the Planning Committee on the 25th of May.
Move them as a correct record, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Is that found a seconder?
Seconder.
Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. That is unanimous. Thank you, members. The next item on the agenda is public question time. We don't have any general public questions this evening, so I will move on to item 5, which is planning applications. We don't have any items in Part B, so we will, but we have 2 items in Part A, so we will move on to those. The first application is application number 21/00726 full. Land south of the Limes, Gosfield. We have 2 speakers. Their statements are going to be read by Alison. The first statement is from Mr. Stephen Westover, who has a statement which is now going to be read by Alison. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is the statement of Stephen Westover. Thank you for the opportunity to make a statement about this application. I am a local resident with particular interest in trees, countryside issues and nature conservation. I have commented on the previous applications for this development and made a statement to the Planning Committee on application 18/02007. I hold the professional diploma in arboriculture and have worked as a self-employed arboricultural consultant for the last 16 years, following 24 years as a local government tree officer. This application is not significantly different from the previous one, 18/02007, for this site, involving minor changes in layout to accommodate 2 extra units. However, it continues to have similar errors in the arboricultural impact assessment and still fails to provide any detail for the management of the extensive areas of open space, both matters which were dealt with by adequate conditions attached to the consent for the previous application, but which have not been dealt with in the conditions proposed to be attached to this. My letter dated 5th of April 2021, objecting to the application, presumably available to you, sets out my concerns. The items in bold are my suggestions for amendments to conditions 10, 13 and 14. The remainder is detailed information. 1. Condition 10. The Arboricultural Impact Assessment, AIA, continues to contain several omissions, the key ones of which I covered in my letter of objection. However, To summarise, at Section 7, the AIA recommends the preparation of an arboricultural method statement. This should be a requirement of any permission granted and specifically included in proposed condition 10 as follows. Quotes, the development hereby approved shall be carried out in accordance with the recommendations within the arboricultural impact assessment prepared by D.F. Clark, 24 September 2020, DFCP 33H2-01 Rev E, and an arboricultural method statement to be agreed and approved prior to the start of the development. 2. Proposed condition 13 requires that a biodiversity enhancement strategy be submitted and approved by the planning authority prior to occupation. I would suggest that this plan should be submitted and agreed prior to the start of the development. 3. Condition 14, open space management. The application proposes a significant area of open space, and the Section 106 agreement attached to the outline consent provides for a financial contribution towards upkeep. An earlier application for outline consent hinted at the formation of a management company, but there is still no indication of how this land is to be managed or how the management is to be paid for. Will it be a service charge on the new properties, or will Gosfield Parish Council be expected to pay? This is covered in proposed condition 14, but the submission and agreement of the landscape and ecological management plan is not required until prior to the occupation of the development. Given the importance of the landscape and open space element of this scheme, I would suggest that this plan should be submitted and approved prior to the start of the development. Similar conditions were approved by members for the previous consent 18/02007, and I hope they can be approved for this consent. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alison. The next statement is from Miss Laura Dudley-Smith, who is the agent, and again this statement will be read by Alison. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you. This is the statement by Laura Dudley-Smith of Stratton Parker. Good evening, members. Thank you for allowing us to submit this statement for your consideration this evening. I have prepared this statement on behalf of our client and applicant, Chelsteen Homes. Chelsteen Homes are a highly regarded local developer with a proven track record for delivery of high-quality schemes in Essex over the past 30 years. You may recall that this scheme was considered by the Planning Committee on the 2nd June last year in a very similar form and achieved a resolution to grant based on the fact that the benefits of the proposals would outweigh any harm, and that the proposals did not introduce anything which would go against the principle of development established as part of an original outline consent for 19 units, granted in February 2018. The detailed applications considered last year was for 17 dwellings, however, and the scheme before you today seeks to increase this to 19. The consent granted last year remains an extant and deliverable permission, and thus represents a fallback position for this application and is an important material consideration in this regard. The revised scheme replaces one of the original 4-bed units with 2 3-bed ones and provides an additional 3-bed affordable home. The 2 additional units therefore provide 1 more market dwelling and 1 more affordable home, thus bringing the total provision of affordable homes on the site up to 7, or 37%, in compliance with local policy. The scheme also remains policy compliant in all other areas, such as parking provision, refuse storage and collection, garden sizes, and provision of on-site public open space, for example. Your officers have provided a very detailed report which confirms this, and also reassesses the planning balance for the updated proposals. The assessment concludes that the benefits of the scheme outweigh any adverse impacts, particularly given the marginal 5-year housing land supply position. The updated proposals have not given rise to any objections from statutory consultees, such as highways, ecology, heritage or tree officers, given the minor nature of the changes. The Section 106 obligations previously agreed will continue to be honoured, with financial contributions increased proportionately. The proposals support MPPF policy for the efficient use of land alongside the requirements for well-designed, attractive and healthy places. The site is therefore a rare opportunity to provide additional homes to support Braintree's housing supply in a modest manner and without detriment to the scheme as a whole, on land where the principle of development has already been established. We hope that you will therefore be able to agree with your officer's recommendation set out on page 30 of the report. Thank you very much for your time. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Alison. We'll now move on to presentation, which will be done by Melanie. Thank you, Melanie.
Good evening, members. I will deal with the comments made by Mr. Westover in the public question time later on in my near the end of my presentation. So, as has been alluded to, this site should be fairly familiar to most of you, as it came to us this time last year, a scheme for 17 units. The application before you this evening is for the erection of 19 dwellings with associated access, parking, garaging, landscaping and amenity space on land south of the Limes, Gosfield. Moving on to the location plan. So running along the top of the site to the north is the residential street known as the Limes, and running down the eastern side here is the A1017, or it's known as the street, where it runs through Gosfield. This is the proposed site layout. It looks very similar to the scheme that was approved last year for the 17 units. The additional affordable unit is up the top here. So this originally was a pair of houses. It's now become a terrace of 3. And it's at this point here where the larger 4-bedroom property has been removed and replaced by 2 3-bedroom detached houses. In relation to particularly this side of the development, this kind of egg-shaped area, that remains the same as previously approved. This just shows you a bit more detail in terms of the ecology corridor, which is proposed along the western boundary of the site. Along the southern boundary of the site, an existing row of lime trees. And then the main feature within the site is this historic line of lime trees that runs along that northern portion of the site. So this plan here shows the parking distribution throughout the site. These blue spaces here are the visitor spaces distributed throughout the site, and then those coloured yellow are the surface car parking spaces for each of the dwellings, and then some of the properties have garages too. The next lot of slides show you proposed elevations for a number of the house types. So this is house type 1, house type 2, a more simplified design, house type 3, a larger house type there with a front and rear gable, and this is house type 4 with the front and rear gable and then the oversailing bedroom with the car parking spaces below. House type 4A, a variation on the earlier design with an alternate dormer design. House type 5. This is house type 6. Again, those 5 and 6 are the more modest style properties where the rooms sit slightly within the roof. One of, I think that's the wrong label on that. It's not a 2-bedroom property. Sorry about that. This is one of the other house types proposed. This is the terrace of 3 houses that I referred to earlier in the presentation along the top section. And so this was the originally a pair of houses, and it's now been changed into a terrace of 3 3-bedroom properties. And that's the rear elevation there. So all of them have got patio doors that face out onto a garden. And then here are the plans for a double garage. And then moving on to photographs of the site. So this photograph here is taken on the opposite side of the road from the site. So the road in front of you there is the 1017, and then this is the looking southwest at the corner of the site, and you can just make out some of the historical lime trees sat within the site. The next photograph is looking westwards along the limes. So just out of view here, you just can't just see the houses within the limes. But you can make out, again, this is one of the historic limes within the site, and this portion of the site will actually remain devoid of any development, and development will actually only happen beyond the second row of historic lime trees within the site. This photograph is again looking down the 1017 towards the proposed access, so this is looking south. The next photograph shows you the access to the site. So this is the existing access to the site, but will also be the proposed access to the site, accessing onto the street. That access remains the same as approved in the last two previous applications. Now, for some reason, I thought the access was really good and provided a second slide showing the access again, so we'll move swiftly on. The next photographs show views across the site from various points around the boundary. So these photographs are looking south from the limes. Again, in this photograph, you can make out a couple of the historic limes. Again, in this one as well, this is looking from the limes, looking south. In this photograph here, you get a better appreciation of the historic trees that are going to be retained, and then just in the background of the photographs, that's the bottom, the southern edge of the site, an existing row of lime trees. Again, this photograph is looking westwards. So this is where the ecological corridor will be, along here, running along where the land then drops away quite significantly, and that will also be included within the ecological corridor. And the last photograph is another view across the site, and beyond where these trees in the foreground are is the developable area where the 19 dwellings would be sited. Moving on, the heads of terms for this application, for the Section 106, are the same as the previous application, although they have been slightly adjusted to accommodate the extra two dwellings. So we now have 7 affordable housing units, comprising of 4 affordable rent and 3 for shared ownership. There'd be an open space contribution. That will still be going towards the skate ramp at the recreation ground, but the figure shown there, the 35,000 figure, has reflected the increase in the unit numbers, and then also within the Section 106, which is, I think, something that Mr. Westover brought up in terms of the management of the open space that's going to be on the site. And there is a large amount of open space on this site, a lot more than you would perhaps normally find because of the uniqueness of the trees and the setting of that portion of the site. And so included within the heads of terms is one of those relates to the management of those areas, particularly to do with the open space and the ecology land. And whilst we're on that point, a point was made by Mr. Westover in his last comment about the service charge, and it will be a service charge on the new properties. It's never been the intention that the parish council would take this land on and manage it themselves. That was made clear to me fairly early on in the last application that wouldn't be the case. So that would all be covered within one of the schedules within the Section 106. Moving on. Whilst I was still talking about Mr. Westover's comments, hopefully you all received the email from Alison earlier on this afternoon, which did set out some amendments, which are basically following the amendments that are suggested by Mr. Westover. So 2 of the conditions sorry, excuse me, 13 and 14, the trigger point for when information needs to come in, it's recommended that that is changed from prior to occupation to prior to commencement, and that does then match with what was proposed last time round on the application for 17 dwellings. And then there's an additional condition which is requesting the submission of the arboricultural method statement as requested by the impact assessment. So that's an additional condition that was set out, and I think it will end up being number 27 if agreed to. So hopefully that covers the points that were raised within public speaking. So turning to the summary and conclusion, the site lies within the countryside but is adjacent to the village boundary of Gosfield. Part of the site lies within the conservation area, and there are 2 listed buildings lie nearby. The development would provide 19 dwellings towards the housing supply, including 7 affordable units. Outline consent for up to 19 dwellings was granted in February 2018, and then full planning permission was granted last year for 17 dwellings. Officers are satisfied with the proposed layout and consider the design of the dwellings to be appropriate. Jobs will be provided during the construction phase, and future occupiers are likely to contribute to the vitality of the village. The scheme would retain the historic avenue of lime trees and create an ecology corridor. The proposed development would therefore constitute an acceptable development in planning balance, and is therefore recommended that planning permission is granted. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Alison. Members?
Melanie.
Oh, sorry. Alison. Melanie. Sorry, thank you, Melanie. Members? Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, the principle of development is very firmly established here in 2018 and 2020. So there is a very strong fallback position, and we've got to give, well, very, very considerable weight, I think, to that. I'm sort of pleased to say again that a fruitful dialogue between applicant and officers, which is to be, as always, commended. Not always on offer, but always commended when it does occur. And there are demerits. I mean, we know Gosfield, and the full range of daily services are not there. Some, but not all, and therefore there will be an increased reliance on car travel. But there are a lot of, I think, strengths to get against that demerit. I mean, the open space, it may be to protect the trees, but it is a very generous and unusually generous sort of open space that the parish council won't have to pay the maintenance for. So I think, you know, on balance, I noticed a couple of times the local press are trying to whip this up into a contentious site, and they've, I think, largely failed because I think this is a suitable development that Gosfield can fairly comfortably sort of assimilate. So, sort of happy to move on. I'm pleased also to see the removal of permitted development rights to protect those gardens. Well, we're getting wise to this now, I think. Where we've got a fairly compact development. We want to keep that sort of garden space, and the way to do it is to remove permitted development rights. So happy to move, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Does that find a seconder?
No, can I ask a question?
Yes, first of all, Councillor Horner seconded. Would you like to speak, Councillor Horner?
No, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Wilson.
It's a technical question, really, having read through this. And on page 33, number 6,
seems to be, to my inexperienced eye, the same or very similar to number 22 on page 39. Is there some difference or duplication or... It's page 33, number 6. And it seems to be virtually the same as 22 on page 39. It probably isn't, but...
Well, no, I think you've picked up on there. It was such a good condition, we put it in twice.
That's fine then.
I'll have to refer to Chris in terms of what we do about removing one, because I think they both cover the same things.
So, Madam Chairman, with permission, I would probably suggest we look to amalgamate the wording between 6 and 22. There's a couple of slight changes between the wording, so they effectively do require the same thing, but so we don't need the duplicate condition, so we can remove one of them, but we can just perhaps amend the wording to make sure it covers the content of it. So, yeah, apologies for that omission, and yeah, with members' permission, we can amalgamate the two conditions into one.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Schwer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, I'd just like to comment on the application. As Councillor Mann said, I think the principle of is being well established for permission. It's just a couple of comments really about going through it. I think I'm disappointed really, considering the village situation, that there's not a greater variety of ridge heights, because if you look at Gosfield, and it's very close to the sort of the historic heart, actually, that there's quite a variation in ridge heights, and I think that helps with the character of the village. But I do know that there are a couple of variations in the plan currently, but I would like to have seen more. I think it's very good that there's 7 affordable homes, which is 37%, and that is good. And I also welcome the Section 106, which is going towards facilities to the residents of Gosfield generally. And I think the layout of open space is also essential, really, for this part of Gosfield because of the build that's going on around it. And it stated from the Savills agent that it was compliant, but I'd just like to comment on paragraph 124 of the MPPF, where it says it's about good design as a key aspect of sustainable developments. Yet I haven't seen in these plans, unless I have missed it, and I'm sure the officers will correct me, that there's no sustainability actually built into these houses. We're not aware of the energy levels that these are being built to. I can't see any factors that are encouraging sustainability of either producing energy through solar panels or, in fact, any internal ones, with the concern that a lot of people are beginning to raise about the volume of water that is needed in all of our housing developments these days. So we have reduced flush and showers. And I think that we're beginning to need to start thinking about this, because this planning permission that we're giving is going to be people living in these houses for 50 years. And I'm just a bit concerned that we need to ensure that when people are buying these, especially in perhaps more rural aspects, that they do have some sustainability and they're not hooked up to gas or oil, because otherwise I can see that there's going to be a lot of retrofitting, and the government is already talking about plans to retrofit. And I'm just getting a bit concerned, but I think overall the design is good. But I would like to potentially see those, and also there's no mention of EV charging points even into the guest parking that's on this, and I also think that's quite important going forward for Braintree district as a whole. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Would you like to comment on those points, Melly, on the sustainability points and also the ridge heights? Would you be able to respond to those?
So members may be aware that the previous application, there was a significant amount of work that went into not just redesigning the layout to make sure that the the open space at call it the front of the site, where it's closest to the village, and also the lime trees were retained, and that was quite a significant shift in comparison to the parameters plan that had been approved through the outline application. As well as working on the layout, there was a significant amount of work done on the design of the dwellings to get a variety of house types, so that there were the more simplified designs along the northern side of the site because of their closeness to the limes, so that they weren't a mirror image of the houses within the limes, but there was that simplicity, and then the complexity and in the design then increased as you sort of went through to the site and then down to the end. I note the comments about the ridge heights, and there is a variety within Gosfield, particularly in that part of the village, that being the historic core, there's a variety of everything going on in that part of the village. I think with this site, particularly because of how well treed it is, a lot of the dwellings would be quite well screened from if you were standing, say, outside the Green Man, or the green opposite the Green Man. Actually, it's not called the Green Man anymore, is it? But you probably know where I'm talking about anyway. And so I think the houses would be set far enough within the site so that they aren't particularly obvious within that more the nucleus part of the village. In terms of the question or the comment made about paragraph 124 of the MPPF, and the fact that good design is a key aspect of sustainable developments, I think it's the reference of it's the terminology within the MPPF that is referred to as sustainable development. It doesn't specifically then lead on to the specifics in terms of water recycling and if you're having solar panels. So those elements, to a certain extent, would be covered by the building regulations if it's required. At this stage, we wouldn't have the policy backing to be able to ask for those things. Hopefully that will change within the future, and clearly it's a way that we as a local authority would want to be going anyway in the future. But at this point in time, I think we would struggle to be able to ask for those things because we haven't got that policy backup.
Thank you, Melanie. Does any other member wish to make a comment? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just looking through page 12 with regard to communications you've been having with Anglian Water, are you going to request any conditions regarding the discharge of foul water? There seems to be some, not confusion, but discussion between the two authorities as to who does what. The condition is requested regarding on-site foul water drainage works. Is that something that would be required?
Melanie's just checking whether we have that condition.
Sorry, get sent on and off. I'm just going to double check on that. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, Chris, at all.
I think we'll need to just quickly check the consultation response again, Councillor Councillor Johnson, sorry. So if you just bear with us a second, we'll have a look through the responses. Mel, if you could perhaps check that. Madam Chairman, just with permission, just while Mel is just checking that, just to add to the response for Councillor Schweer, just a couple of points just on the design. So just to emphasise, obviously, the reference being made to it being within the historic core of the village. Members will note at the top of page 21, so where we're considering the heritage impacts of the proposal, there were some concerns being raised over the finishes and the materiality of the dwellings. So we have got conditions recommended requiring those sort of details to come forward for approval, and providing we get some high quality materials come forward in terms of facing brick, roof tile, and then some of the detailing on the buildings, that will all add quite significantly to the character of this development. So I think a lot, as Mel's indicated, a lot of time has been spent on the layout of the development and the distribution of the housing across the site and its relationship with the lime trees. The character will really come from the quality of the finish and the materials, and ultimately we do have control over that. And then just on the sustainability point, just to re-emphasise that this is something where we've got a changing picture, evolving in terms of a policy basis that is evolving, and as our local plan goes through, hopefully for adoption, We've got the Section 2 examination coming up in July. We are very hopeful that we will be able to then start looking at trying to have a solid policy basis in which to require these. At the moment, it's very much through discussion that on some schemes we're seeing some evidence of EV charging points and solar panels and so forth. So it is something that we are seeking to try to negotiate and secure where we can. But the policy basis is clear that in terms of us being able to require it, that's something we're not quite in that position yet. So hopefully that clarification just helps further.
Mel, have you found?
Yes, yeah. So within kind of halfway down through the Anglian Water response on page 12, it does say that we therefore request a condition requiring an on-site drainage strategy. And that was also requested by the SUDS team at Essex County Council. So if we look at condition 17 on page 37, at the bottom of that page there, there is a condition there that requires a scheme to be submitted to minimise the risk of off-site flooding caused by surface water runoff and groundwater due to construction works. That's to do with to reduce any risk off-site, but then prior to that, if we look at condition 16, so at the top end of page 37, there's also a condition there that requires the submission of a detailed surface water drainage for the actual site itself. So both on-site and off-site are covered by both of those conditions. Does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah? Good. Okay.
Yes, Councillor Lawson.
Sorry, can I just ask you one more thing which is intriguing me? And I'd like to be intrigued. An ecological corridor will be retained along the western side of the site. What exactly do you intend to do with that? Because I've not seen that before. What will it contain, do you know? Or does it contain it at the moment, or will it contain something? Will we get excited, or what is it? Thank you.
Can't guarantee that you'll get excited, but it has been surveyed, and Amanda, our ecologist, has been out there a number of times, and there is evidence to show that it forms part of runs for badgers, and so that's why, and not that any of you would have visited the site, but it really drops down quite significantly, and although it's included within the red line, I'm not sure anyone would really want that piece of land within their garden. So it seemed to, when we were first looking at the layout of the site last year, year before, it seemed to work quite well that it could be kept to be able to allow the animals and the badgers particularly to still keep connecting from, there's a badger set at one end of the site, and then a much larger set beyond the application site, but clearly that's where they were travelling towards. And given the topography of that part of the site, it seemed to make sense to retain that or keep that outside of people's private gardens, because then we would then not have any control over how members of the public would use that space in terms of putting grass clippings and things like that, because of, and also, I say, given the topography, it wouldn't have lent itself naturally to be used as a private garden, and it would have been difficult to maintain. And so by keeping it as an ecological corridor, it's more likely that it can be used by those animals, and particularly the badgers, to be able to, for them to be able to continue moving along from one set to another.
Thank you, Melanie. Hopefully they won't go in people's gardens and it cause a bit of damage.
We have suggested that because the gardens that run down to that part of the site, beyond that there's some really nice views across open countryside. So what we've suggested is that if people were to have something like chain link fence or something like that, so that you've still got the security there, but you can then still have those views across the garden rather than having a close boarded fence and kind of blocking that out. That's what I would prefer to see, and that's what we would encourage them to put in, so that then access to that space remains completely private and then is managed by the management company, but the residents who live in those properties still benefit from the views out through that side of the site.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Well, I think that's, nobody else wants to speak, so we'll move on to the vote. So it's been moved by Councillor Mann, seconded by Councillor Horner, that we grant this application with the two amended conditions that Melanie referred to, the additional condition and also amalgamation of condition 6 and 22, I think it is, All those in favour? Thank you, members. Any against? Any abstentions? One abstention. Thank you, members. That application has been granted. Thank you. So we'll now move on to the next application, which is application number 21/00924/VAR, which is the former Broomhills Industrial Estate, Bodsbrook Road, Braintree. We have one statement which is going to be read by Alison. This statement is from Mr. Christopher Evans, who is from Crudas Homes Limited. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is the statement of Christopher Evans of Crudas Homes. Thank you for your time in considering the application this evening. The application site at the former Broomhills Industrial Estate was purchased by Crudas Homes with full planning permission back in December 2020. It was considered that the designs of the approved houses were not of the high quality that Crudas Homes requires from its developments. Therefore, this application was submitted to replace the approved houses on plots 5 to 42 and plots 61 to 81 with designs that we believe will create a higher quality development and neighbourhood. Additionally, with the assistance of the planning officer and the urban designer, the proposal also improved the position of several units so that they have a better relationship with the street scenes and open space areas. As this application is focused on plots 5 to 42 and plots 61 to 81, it is not proposing to alter the site boundaries from that originally approved. We do recognise that some of the neighbouring properties have raised concerns regarding the current condition of the boundaries between their property and the development. It has been highlighted to officers that some of the concerns were initially raised approximately 2 years ago. Whilst Crudas Homes were not involved in the project at this time, our team have now contacted several of the neighbouring properties and will continue to contact any outstanding residents. Crudas Homes appreciate that development can be disruptive whilst construction works are ongoing, and we will be considerate to our neighbours during this period. Once the construction of the development is at the appropriate stage and it is safe to do so, we will engage with the necessary residents to discuss boundary treatments to alleviate their concerns. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Alison. So we'll now move on to the presentation, which is going to be done by Andrew. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, members. As set out by Chair, this application relates to a Section 73 application at the former Broomhills industrial site. The variation seeks to vary Condition 2, Condition 4 and 27 of the former planning permission to enable revised house types to those previously approved, and as set out in the comments from the developer Crudas Homes, it doesn't seek to vary the flats on the site that were previously approved. Those would remain as per the previous permission. For context, this is the site location plan. Many of you may be aware of the site. It's been unkept for some time and has ceased activity as an industrial estate many years ago. In fact, a number of the units on the site have since been demolished. There is, though, still remaining one large unit to the eastern boundary of the site adjacent to Podbrook Road. So Rains Road to the north, along with Grains Close, and to the west you've got Nailing Road, and to the south you've got Guernsey Way, as well as residential properties within Frisian Close and Jersey Way. The site is located within town development boundaries in a sustainable location with good access for day-to-day services and facilities. There's links via footpath networks to the site, from the site, to the centre of town. Just for context, I'll run through some photos of the site to refresh members' minds of how the site fits into its locality. This is a photo looking towards the two existing accesses to the site. One, as you'll see, is referred to as the western access in the report, and the other is referred to as the eastern access. So the eastern access is the one to the furthest part of the photo here, and the western access is this one. So the western access would be retained and the eastern access would be closed, and that's secured by condition under previous consent. Turning to the internal aspects of the site, this is the large remaining unit adjacent to Podsbrook Road, and you can see that there are still areas of existing hard standing. This is a photo from another aspect looking south along the same building, and you can see there how the levels change. You can see how it sort of slopes towards the south part of the site. This is taken adjacent to the northern boundary of the site, with Grains Close on the right-hand side of this picture of existing properties, and this is looking towards the site's western boundary where Nailing Road can be seen in the distance. This is a photo slightly further down from that last position, looking towards existing properties in Grains Close. Again, you can see how the levels difference relates on site. This is a photo looking from the northern boundary towards the south of the site. You can see there the area of clearance where the former industrial units were, but again with the larger industrial unit to the eastern boundary of the site retained. And this is just a closer photo looking along the western boundary of the site and Nailings Close, and you can see towards the far end of the photo here the trees subject to a group preservation order with tree protection fencing around them. This is a photo taken towards the southwestern corner of the site, and you can see there a view towards residential properties within Nailings Close, again giving an impression of the levels difference between the two sites. And this is a photo looking back in the same area but towards the north. And again, this is a photo looking towards Grains Close, so just another longer distance view. And this is a photo towards the southern boundary with existing property in Frisian Close, and you can see there again that that property is actually slightly lower than the site, where it rises up again as you sort of head further east along Guernsey Way. And this is a existing tree on site subject to a tree preservation order. It's a Norway field maple. And this is the western access that's to be closed as part of the plan permission. Turning to the proposal, as set out in the officer's report, the principal development has been firmly established under the formal plan application, which included an absence of affordable housing due to a viability exercise carried out at that stage. This section 73 application seeks to vary conditions 2, 4 and 27 of the extant plan permission to amend house type designs on plots 5 to 42 and plots 61 to 81. The reason that conditions 4 and 27 are drawn into the variation is outlined within the report, but essentially it's because those conditions relate to layout plans that would be superseded by revised drawings. The proposed development has been revised to address officer and consultee comments. Some additional sustainability measures have also been secured and offered as part of the development by the developer. And a deed of variation would be completed to include an additional obligation securing the necessary RAMS payment, but it would also secure the obligations under the original plan permission and make sure that they're linked to the varied consent. So just for context really, this is the originally approved site layout and this is the proposed site layout. So I'll move on to another slide in a moment which shows an overlay, but you can quite easily see that there's not a notable change in terms of the layout. It is the form of the houses perhaps and their detailed design that has changed, but in terms of neighbour amenity and wider amenity of local residents, back-to-back distances, garden sizes all remain in general accordance with required standards and have not changed since the grant of the original plan permission. This is the overlay plan referred to, which shows there the red line indicates the previously approved dwellings and they are overlaid on the grey outline which shows the proposed dwellings, and you can see that the plots with the flats have remained unchanged. Again, housing mix is another matter that hasn't changed, so the mix and tenure of the dwellings remains the same as the extant plan permission. there'd be 100% compliance of NDSS, and 29 of the 59 dwellings would be in accordance with building regulations Part M Category 2, meaning they would be accessible and adaptable. Moving on to the street scenes, as alluded to in the slide on the proposal, there has been negotiation between officers and the developer during pre-application and application stage, whereby amendments have been sought to strengthen the street scenes. They have, officers feel, a good coherence to them, rhythm, as well as punctuating features such as use of materials and architectural detailing to provide key strategic plots with architectural interest. But you can see the general rhythm of dual-pitched roofs with punctuated with gable-fronted properties, and the use of garages whereby the long axis is where the ridge runs. You can also see elements such as chimneys. You've got also brick banding and good use of materials to break up visual monotony. So much the same again, you can see there how a bookstop approach is almost taken to determination of street scenes where a new material is used to illustrate that that is the end of that particular row of properties. Just to run through the house types proposed, there's a number of house types. Some of them have slight variations within them, but I've just sought to set out here the main house types, and there are some variations which aren't included. But you can see how brick banding, lintels, and porches have all been incorporated in a uniform manner, but also with some variation. So again, just a slide showing some of the house types present. There has been, during the course of the application, some comments received and concerns from neighbouring properties about how the boundary treatment is going to be addressed, particularly along this western boundary where the property is back onto Nailing Road. This was the originally approved boundary treatment, which, as you can see, it's relatively faint, but you can see that there's the retention of a hedgerow along the boundary here that is retained and provides a good level of visual screening and would actually form a priority habitat. That, when the original application for this Section 73 application came forward, there was a slight draft error perhaps in that it showed a boundary treatment wall, the boundary treatment 1.8 metre fence, along that boundary behind the hedgerow, but that was not intended. And you can see here the revised boundary treatment, which shows boundary treatments that reflect the previous permission with the hedgerow retained and fencing provided between plots. Another point that was picked up under this application was a consultation response from Essex Fire and Rescue, which highlighted that there would potentially be some difficulty for fire appliance to reach the plots towards the furthest north-eastern corner of the site. Whilst it was the case that the 45 metre rule may have been applicable and could have been met in strict accordance with the building regulations, the developer did concede and agreed to enlarge the turning head in that area just marginally to incorporate it so that it can be used for turning of a fire appliance to provide better access, essentially, to those plots. Trees. There are a number of trees on the site, and the retention and removal of trees were all established under the original application in terms of how many and so forth. But this plan just seeks to illustrate here the existing trees on the site, and this is taken from the original arboricultural impact assessment. And on the right-hand side, you've got a map which shows the TPOs on site. So you've got 3 individual TPOs within the site boundary and a couple of groups of trees. Tree removal would entail 5 individual trees, which are subject to a tree preservation order, and also the the removal of a hawthorn hedge. The trees were not of a high quality; they were category C, and the hedge was category B. The hedge couldn't be included in the layout; it was practical, and the removal of the trees that were protected have been established and would be mitigated through a detailed landscaping scheme with sufficient supplementary planting to enhance street scenes, augment open space and mitigate against parked cars. But just whilst on this point, as members will be aware, there was a circulated update this afternoon which essentially notes that whilst the arboricultural impact assessment was conditioned for compliance within the previous permission, there was a slight omission perhaps insofar as it didn't contain measures for tree protection or an arboricultural method statement, and both of these matters are now recommended to be addressed through the addition of a condition. This layout is not an approved layout, but it does show an illustrative arrangement of how street planting and trees could be provided within the site, and there is a condition that would require a detailed landscaping scheme for the specific species, the distances and so on. So I've kind of covered the second part of this update just now, but you'll also note that since the publication of the agenda, it was also brought to light that there were no conditions necessarily restricting or controlling compaction and piling activities on the site, which can cause concerns to local neighbours in terms of noise and vibration. So we have also sought to recommend a further condition to control that going forward, and as just discussed, an additional condition recommended to secure an arboricultural method statement and tree protection plan. The wording of the condition circulated to members earlier this afternoon, so I won't necessarily read through these verbatim, but this is a condition which plans be submitted in relation to vibration activities that would be consulted upon with environmental health officers to ensure that it's acceptable prior to approval under a discharge condition application. And this would be condition 32, which, as you can see, is quite a detailed condition in this instance, because we do need that tree protection detail as well as the method statement. So this is just to ensure that all those measures are suitably secured under the varied consent. So to summarise and conclude, the application site benefits from extant plan permission for the residential redevelopment of a former industrial estate to deliver 81 market dwellings. The Section 73 proposed alternate house type designs to those previously approved. There are no objections from statutory consultees. The proposed development has been revised to address officer and consultee comments. The house type design is considered to represent a betterment over what was originally approved. The boundary treatment and access arrangements remain unchanged from the previous approval, albeit the conditions will be varied to reflect the latest plans. Future occupants would benefit from a good standard of amenity. And in terms of additional sustainability measures, the developer has offered to provide electric vehicle charging to all dwellings that have on-plot parking and solar panels on roofs where necessary to meet suitable sustainability standard. And it's not considered that any additional harm would arise from the proposed development. And so therefore, having regard to the identified benefits and harms, it's concluded that the benefits would outweigh the harms in the planning balance. Officers recommend that plan permission be granted subject to the conditions and the completion of a deed of variation to the original Section 106. Thank you. I'm happy to accept any questions.
Thank you, Andrew. Members, Councillor Spray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I'm pleased to support the recommendation to approve this. I think those of us who've been aware of this site for a while, and it has been around for quite a long time, will be extremely pleased to see it developed. It really needs it. I like the housing mix and the designs, but what I am particularly pleased about this evening is the statement made by Mr. Evans on boundary treatments. I've received a number of emails over the last 12 months from both the ward councillors on behalf of residents, several of whom are quite upset, and that's not too strong a word to use, about the way their boundaries between their properties and the site are looking at the moment, and the problems it's causing them. So as I say, I'm very pleased to see the comments from Mr. Evans that they have already started to have some discussion with some of those neighbouring properties, and that will continue throughout the development. I think it's very necessary that the developer is a good neighbour. We all know that developments cause noise and disruption. But some of the photographs I've seen, which were forwarded to me, as I say, by the ward councillors, show that some of the fencing and the boundaries between the neighbouring properties and the site are in a pretty awful state and are as a result of work that sort of started. So heartily support that proposal from the developer to work well with the neighbours and try and put right any concerns that they have. Other than that, I don't think I have any other comments. I like the designs, the design mix, and yes, really would be very, very good to see this come forward. So I will move officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Spray. Does that find seconder? Councillor Schwer, thank you. Would you like to speak, Councillor?
No, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Councillor Thorogood.
Yeah, I'd just like to say I'm glad to see a brownfield site being redeveloped. It's obviously good use for that. I did say at a previous full council meeting that I thought this site would have been a good place for the electric charging forecourt because of the proximity to the town, because it would have been easy to walk into town, and also because of the amount of workers on the Springwood Industrial Estate. But obviously housing on this brownfield site is good, so I will support the scheme.
Thank you, Councillor Thorogood. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chairman. To think they wanted to build 161 dwellings on this site and a monster supermarket. So we went 161, 107 down to sort of 81, which is much more sort of realistic. I agree with what's been said about the mix of housing, but of course the downside is it's all market housing, and there isn't any affordable housing at all. And sort of viability, I think, was sort of pleaded, and they sort of claimed a significant loss on the site, and I presume that we followed the usual sort of viability appraisal and agreed that this was the case. I mean, this is the problem of incremental development on urban fringes. You don't get a lot of infrastructure gain, and there's very little here. I know that people who want to give us wise counsel, who sometimes live in villages, suggest that this is the right place to have high density housing, and it is. It's a pre-development site. I agree with that, but there's fairly minimal. What we used to call in the old days community gain. I mean, there is in the 106, I think 100,000 for early years and childcare. Sort of nothing for secondary because County Council said there was sufficient capacity. I think there was 75,000 for Clare Road upgraded play equipment, 50,000 upgrade and 25,000 future maintenance. That's not a great amount. And I mean, a question, there was 30,000 for NHS according to their formula. It remains a mystery to us why it's so low, but they won't take more. And it says it's to go to a new primary care hub. Now, I probably asked this question at other stages when we've considered this site. Which primary care hub, and is it just to fund repositioning of existing capacity, or is it to provide increased capacity? Because that's really what we want. We don't want a surgery moving or existing capacity replicated, just move somewhere else into new premises. We want, for the benefit of the town, obviousincreased capacity. I'd like some sort of reassurance, if possible, that this fairly meagre 30,000 will go towards that. Do we know, or is it just simply as in the report?
I think I'd have to refresh my memory of the specific wording of the 106 and just check what that specific contribution referred to. If it doesn't refer to the exact project, it would be my understanding it would be open to negotiation between Section 106 lead officer involvement with other officers and the developer and the NHS to find an appropriate project for that contribution to go towards, would be my understanding, but I wouldn't know for certain. If it doesn't reference in the Section 106 the specific project, it would be open to discussion as to whether it goes towards enhancing existing infrastructure or contribution towards additional infrastructure. I know that there's been a new hub in Braintree Centre in the Manor Street development and so on, so it would something we'd have to review at the time to establish where that money's going to go towards, but rest assured that officers will work to make sure that money goes towards best use.
Thank you.
I don't know if Chris had anything further to add to that.
Nothing substantial. I'll see if I can just check the 106 agreement for you, see if I can find something. But I think Andy's answered the question there.
I did check it in the sort of 1919 permission, and it was that vague. Sort of vague stuff about towards sort of a new hub. So that's probably, I think you're quite right, that's probably all we've got. And there'll have to be negotiations nearer the sort of time of completion.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Fair points. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As an ex-industrial estate, and I don't really know its full history, I'm always a bit concerned about possible pollution issues. We have had something's happened locally, which has caused that develop tremendous additional costs, which they're not allowed for. It's not our issue, I know, but it just crosses my mind about pollution. What I'm thinking about it.
I think, if I could respond to that, thank you, Councillor Hilton, for the question. There were two conditions attached to the original consent in relation to contamination. There's a current discharge condition application that's live and undetermined, whereby the developer has submitted details to discharge condition 19, which relates to investigation of contamination and remediation. So they are aware of the contamination on site, and they're working with environmental health to ensure that that contamination is suitably remediated, so there would be no adverse impact on end users and or even construction staff. Hopefully that puts your mind at ease in relation to contamination. They will be.
Any other members wish to make a comment on this application? I'll just make a brief comment myself, and that I'm pleased to see that there have been improvements to the design. Obviously, the developer could have gone ahead with the existing permission, but it's good to see that developers are looking at the design, and if they're not satisfied with it, are prepared to come back with another application. So I think that is positive. So, members, it has been moved by Councillor Spray and seconded by Councillor Schwer that we grant this application. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you very much, members. That application has been granted with the additional two conditions, and the variation to the 106. Thank you very much, members. And that now brings us to the end of our meeting. Thank you for your attendance and look forward to seeing you next time. Good night.